Hello, everyone. It's good to be back. My talk is about porting LAMP applications to vibe.d. I should start off by saying what this talk isn't about. I'm not going to go over exactly how vibe.d works. I think there's been some good talks about that anyways. And so you don't really have to understand completely vibe.d to get the gist of how this works. But it's also not some magic bullet that I wrote to cross-compile PHP to vibe.d, unfortunately. But anyways, so what is a LAMP application? LAMP application is Linux, Apache web server, MySQL database, could be other types of databases, and PHP language. Also could be Perl, any other language. And really Linux, there's WAMP applications, and there's for Windows, and there's Apache web server. You could do Nginx and stuff like that. So the real draw of this is that it's pretty much a full open source stack. Originally, when you could basically write a giant enterprise level application online without having to pay any licensing fees. So a bit of history. So in 2009, I joined my family's company, National Resource Management, specializing in installing smart cooler controls. My job was basically to create an internal job tracking system, system to track installations, sales, those kinds of things. In one division of the company, there was an application called Willow Job Tracker, which was a LAMP application, and they were using it to some pretty good success. And another key ingredient here is that I had very little web development experience when I was hired. So I said, yeah, sure, we could do something like that. I think if I could go back and tell my former self, no, don't use PHP, things might have turned out differently, but then I wouldn't have this talk to give. So, and at the time, D was at version 2.032. There was no vibe.d. There was none of that stuff. It didn't even occur to me for D to be a valid choice for doing web development. So I didn't even have that possibility. So this is kind of a screenshot of what our application looks like today. It's basically a list of jobs that are being installed. I customized it to fit the workflow needs of our company. So it's a highly customized LAMP application, lots of back-end improvements. Adding some features to this was really painful. I usually had to add like about 11 files, classes and Smarty templates and things like that. And I also introduced some nicer UI improvements like jQuery and jQuery UI to try and get things a little bit more active. And so in 2013, I attended DConf and saw a presentation from Vladimir Pentelev, I think that's how you say his name, on doing web development in D. I highly recommend, if you're interested in that, to go look up that, because I watched it again, it's still pretty relevant. And it shows like the power of what vibe.d does, and gives you. And I said, I actually could use D to do my web application. So I began considering it. How am I going to use vibe.d? How could I port my application over? And my first thought was, there's no way, because I have 150 files between templates and classes and everything. There's no way I'm going to be able to do all this. And at the end of it, really what I'm going to have is a slightly better, more maintainable system. But is it really worth the company to spend the time, for me to spend the time to do that? And then I had a fateful conversation with Andre. He said, when are you going to port this? This might have actually been at 2014, the next year. When are you going to port this PHP application and start using D all the time? And I said, I gave him all the reasons why I shouldn't do it. And he said, well, you could still have Apache serve vibe.d pages, and it could do part of it. And I thought about it. I said, yeah, it actually is possible. And that's what really got my wheels turning. Is like, I could do this a piece at a time, and just make one piece vibe.d and the other piece PHP, and have it all run together, and just kind of do it in my spare time, So one question asked is, why would I do this? Why would you port PHP to vibe.d? First of all, performance. So I think PHP does perform pretty well, but it is still a scripting language. And some of the things that the particular application I'm working with are really slow. Some of the things that it does, that just annoys all the stuff it has to load into memory every time you look at a web page. It's statically typed. I don't know how many of you use PHP or a scripting language and know, you check the value of this variable in PHP. So yeah, you could check that value, but that variable doesn't exist, so it's always going to be nothing. So, and you just rack your brain trying to figure out what's wrong. It has nice REST support, so I am writing some iOS apps that connect directly to the back end, and having REST support really helps there. And the big thing, I think, is metaprogramming. So D itself excels at being able to do introspection and stuff like that. I mean, a testament to that is the diet template system. So basically, it's reading a file that's a completely different language, domain-specific language, compiling that into D code, and then sending it to the compiler, all in the compilation step. So there's no intermediary steps. It's pretty neat that you can do that, and because it's D, because D is really fun to use. So these are the porting requirements that I came up with. This is an application that's going to be used every day. People use it, to anytime they're making a change to a job or something like that, they log in and use it. So we have to keep it running, even though we're changing parts of it. I want to keep the same database model, including authentication, because I don't want to have to go back and change my PHP code. So anything I can do to avoid developing PHP at this point would be great. I want a seamless integration between the DHP and the D and PHP sides from a user perspective. Meaning, I want the user, they might notice that, oh, this looks a little different, but I want them to be able to be comfortable going back and forth as they're using one page that's written in D and another page in PHP, that this is the same application. It's not two different applications. The other thing is, since this was 2009 when I started working on this, there was no mobile-first initiatives or HTML5 or Bootstrap or any of that stuff. So I want to fix all the problems that it's kind of like baggage. I really didn't even know what a CSS was at that time. So I just accepted everything that was there, and when I've tried to fix it recently, it's just too big of a mess. So in my case, I decided I'm going to standardize on Bootstrap. All right, so this is my plan. I'll go through these one at a time. So the first thing we're going to do is configure Apache. So Apache configuration, it's not the easiest thing to do. But what I did here is I want Apache to handle all the incoming requests. vibe.d is handled via reverse proxy. Reverse proxy is the same as a proxy. It's just the server that's being proxied, not the client. And we're going to dedicate a whole subdirectory to vibe.d requests that isn't already used. So some route that is not going to be mistaken for one of my PHP routes. We're going to use proxy pass and proxy pass reverse. Don't ask me why you need all these directives in the order they are, but if you don't do it this way, it doesn't work. I've given up trying to understand why, but this is what came out when I asked Stack Overflow or whoever. Essentially, we're going to send all requests that go to /d to a local server at port 8080, which is the vibe.d server. And at the same time, it's going to strip off that /d/ so the vibe.d server sees it as if you were connecting to it directly. Now go back a second. So what the proxy pass reverse does actually is any headers that come back get rewritten, the /d gets added back in, because you want it to look to the client as if it's all under this /d/. That completes the illusion, kind of, that it's a different server. The only thing that doesn't do is it doesn't handle actual links inside your content. So I want the vibe.d server to not even know that it's under this special directory, so it's spitting out URLs that start with /, not /d/. So this proxy HTML filter does that with those two directives. And then the other thing is ensure you have the comp file under the mods enabled directory in your Linux installation. This did not get installed by Ubuntu by default. I think it was a mistake. But basically, if you don't have that file, the proxy HTML module loads and does nothing. So I spent about 2 hours trying to figure out why I'd done all this configuration and it wasn't doing a thing. So that's definitely important. Okay, the second part is we're going to do PHP session management. So I wanted to have both PHP and vibe.d using the same session storage so that they could read each other's session storage and in some cases modify it. By default, PHP uses a file session storage, and so all we have to do is configure this here. We're going to use Redis, or Redis, I don't know how you pronounce that. But anyways, we're going to use that as our session storage as supported by D and vibe.d right out of the box. I'm sorry, it's supported by vibe.d and PHP right out of the box. You just change this thing and you have to install a PHP Redis module. Change the save path to, right now we're using TCP. I'm not sure if vibe.d supports Unix sockets for Redis session storage. At the time that I checked, it did not, but that would be a much more secure mechanism. You'll see in a second. And then the other thing we have to do here is set the session serialize handle to PHP serialize. By default, it's PHP. Now, you might wonder what the difference between PHP and PHP serialize is, and you'll find out later. But that is kind of important. So Redis is by default insecure, as I said. So basically, definitely want to bind to only the local host in your Redis server. You can add a password, but there's no encryption. I think it's just sent over as like a hash. But if anyone can get onto your system, they pretty much have access to the Redis server. So that's why it's good if you can do Unix sockets. Once that's supported, that's what I intend to move to. But right now, it's over TCP. Okay, so now we've done all the system configuration. It's all set up. Now we actually get to write some decode. So the data model. MySQL is supported with MySQL native in vibe.d. I've been using that for about a year, and it was started by Steve Teal and continued by Nick Cebolowski, who's been really good at fixing bugs and adding features to it, so it's pretty nice. CoolTrack's data system is handwritten SQL using string interpolation. What that means is that basically you get a whole bunch of your parameters and then you make a giant SQL string. We're not using prepared statements or anything, so it's just really ugly. But the only thing the other thing about this is because it's handwritten, they're hand-created tables. ORM is not an easy thing to add to this because ORM kind of expects the tables to be a certain way. And because you have all these hand-tuned queries, it's not going to work right. So I decided I'm just going to keep doing the same thing in terms of handwritten SQL. Now, I needed something a little bit more advanced than MySQL native's interface, just because I do a lot of you're going to have to do a lot of string manipulation to create the SQL queries, plus what it gives back to you is an array of variants, which are not that easy to deal with. So I created a serialization library. I have a theory that everyone who uses D eventually creates a serialization library because it's so easy. But in any case, so you can see here an example. This is like a representation of a user or a contact in the database. I've added some attributes here where I say, okay, this is, in the database, this password hash field is really called password, but it's really the hash, so I wanted to call it password hash and leave password to something else. Status is actually a single character, which is an A for active and I for inactive. This is just the way it was set up. But I just want to reread it as a Boolean. That's much easier to deal with. And so my serialization library basically reads through, looks at attributes, and says, okay, I know how to deal with this. I'll pull this. Instead of pulling out an array of variants, I pull out a person. And if you look down here, everything in here is pretty much MySQL native except for the by item thing, which is what I wrote. And then basically change it from a range of rows to a range of person structs. I also wanted to build some nicer tools around creating queries, because a lot of times when you're dealing with web requests, you have options and you want to do different queries based on the options. So basically this is like some functions that I wrote to generate a query based on whether things are null or not. So in vibe.d you can get parameters from the web as nullables. So n-year is like a nullable year, or a nullable integer. N-week is a nullable integer. And so those where clauses won't be included if they're not passed by the, passed on the get line. So this is kind of a little library I wrote. I think that, we can add some things like this to MySQL native to make it a little bit more. Maybe at some point I'll release some of these little libraries. So the next thing is the authentication and messages and really the session. So just to warn everybody, there is some PHP code coming up. If you want to close your eyes, then you may want to. So I want single sign-on for both PHP and D. That means that I don't want someone to have to sign in twice to use the same application, depending on which server they're talking to. So in order to do that, PHP and D need to be able to see each other's sessions. So we need to be able to read cookies. That obviously happens because they're both going to the same website. But we want to be able to read the sessions and figure out who's logged in, or is there a message or something. Logging out is pretty simple. We just destroy both sessions since they're both in the same place. We just say, destroy the keys based on the cookies, and that works. Logging in is a little bit different. So this is some PHP code. Basically, I'm looking to see, is there a vibe session ID in PHP? If there is, connect to Redis, pull the data out. The data is stored as a JSON string. So we're going to parse it and then basically merge it into our current session. So this way I can inject anything I want into the PHP session from the vibe.d side. And I don't have to worry about, we can have race conditions, because this is when you're actually loading the PHP that works. So this is how I do it on the PHP side. On the D side, so this is specifically for seeing who's logged in, because I wanted to leave the login interaction to the PHP until I turn all the PHP off, and then it will switch to D. But so first I'm checking to see, do I already have a logged in user in my vibe.d session? If I don't, look at the cookies, see if I can get the PHP session data. And if I have it, more serialization. So we have a PHP session data struct that's basically just for this. And I actually did write a PHP deserialize function in D that will take a PHP serialized string and push it into a struct that I give it. The reason that originally we switched the serialization type from PHP to PHP serialization is because the PHP form is some internal, undocumented serialization type that you don't know exactly what it's going to do, and it can change from version to version if they so wanted. Whereas the PHP serialized type uses the PHP serialized function. I can play with it, I can see how it works, and there's actually, on the references section at the end of this presentation, there's actually a free chapter of a book that says, here's how that serialization spec is. So I was able to do that just for simple things. I'm not serializing PHP objects, but all I'm looking for is a username. So this is just the way that the Willow job tracker stores its username. I pull out all the other junk and then just get the username. If I see that it's there, then I say, okay, now I have a user, and I'm now logged in on the vibe.d side. It's the same as on the PHP side. So that works pretty well. All right, so linking between backends. So this this is kind of something that seems obvious, but there's some technical problems, and there's also some design decisions that you have to think about. Remember that we're rewriting all the URL links that come out of the vibe.d server on the Apache side to start with /d. So how do you get back? So the way I figured this out is I'll pick another prefix, in this case php-ext, and when that comes back, of course, it's already going to be rewritten with the /d, and this proxy pass with the exclamation point at the end says, don't redirect that. Don't send that as a proxy to the vibe.d server. And the next line says, anytime you see that, tell the browser to redirect basically to the PHP side. So this way it can go back and forth. If I want to go from PHP to D, I start with /d. If I want to go from D to PHP, I start with /php-ext. These are just things I made up. I mean, if you were going to do this, you could use whatever you thought would be good. I just, use the most obvious thing. So redirect. So that's one thing. Links are sprinkled all over your web application. In the D side and the PHP side, you may have 20, 30 places where you link to one page in your application. When you port a page over, you don't want to have to go through and change them all. So on the D side, let's say I'm porting one page but not another page, I want to link back to the PHP side. Well, instead of putting that directly into writing the link directly with the php-ext, I'm going to put a placeholder in. So I'm going to put a placeholder in DLand that then does the actual redirect, and that way when that gets rewritten, that placeholder will be replaced by the actual implementation for that page that gets ported over. On the PHP side, we use redirects. So anytime I take a page and now it's no longer in PHP, it's now in D, I just cut short the implementation and return to redirect to say, no, redirect to the D page. I think this works for everything but processing form data. So if you're just doing get calls, I think this works fine. So an example in CoolTrack, we have, this is the URL for displaying job information for job 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see that's the URL there. In vibe.d, we're going to implement a placeholder route. So under job 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, anyone who's used vibe.d might recognize how this works. But basically, I'm just saying, here's the handler for everything under job, and here's the first handler for if you have a job number. And I'm just doing a redirect, really simple. Eventually, when I do implement the job details page in vibe.d, then it will have, I'll just replace this whole thing with the actual page. And everything that's in vibe.d is now going to link to this one until it's written, until it's ported over. It'll just do the redirect, and then once it's ported over, it will be in vibe.d, and I don't have to change any links. Here comes some more PHP code. This is the equivalent kind of thing in PHP. Because you're doing a redirect, you have to do a full URL. You can't do a sub-URL. So this all basically is getting what my current URL is, and then it allows me to do this instead of all that stuff. So this is basically a rewritten class that would be, normally this would be something that creates a Smarty template and shows it on the screen. I just replaced that with a redirect here, and everything works, so you can go back and forth. Of course, you don't want to get into an infinite loop, but I think most browsers can detect that now. Front-end navigation. So, one of the things you got to consider is that this is an application that people are going to be using. You want them not to be confused when they're going back and forth. So you want to kind of have the same, structure as the original. So in your new application, you don't want to make drastic changes to the navigation. The top links should definitely be very similar, even if they look different. As an example, we'll see an example in a second here. And perhaps you take this time to improve things with the D side of things, little tweaks here and there. So for an example, this is the original top navigation bar for CoolTrack. I got rid of the wiki tab because it's not something we were using. It just came with it. And then we have the Logout tab, which is actually a button. I just stuffed inside a drop-down menu where you're logged in. So I think it gives a good example of that. The other thing is mobile support. I didn't really have a slide for this, but it's really important. This, like, probably the #1 complaint I get is that people have to, when you log into CoolTrack, it's this big. You have to zoom in and to do anything. It's really a pain in the butt. But that's something that's definitely, for me, was a huge reason to try and recreate something. If I'm going to rewrite everything, I might as well switch to something I enjoy. So congratulations. Now, with those simple tasks, you now have a vibe.d app to impress all your friends and family. We need a good acronym. LAMP was a great acronym. It's easily pronounceable. We're adding vibe.d and Redis, so I came up with Lavdrum. And when I drop Apache and PHP, I'm not going to have any vowels, so I don't know what's going to happen then. But it would be good to have something that's, easily marketable to other people. Huh? And that what? That's not it. No, this is all I could think of. But yeah, it would be nice to have. So here I'd like to show you just another reason, just to show exactly. I've turned JavaScript off because there's a lot of JavaScript happening. Yeah.
Well, actually, you just have to use the first 2 letters of vibe.d and Redis, and then you have La Viradar, which at least has more vowels, so you can pronounce it better.
There you go. That's a good idea. All right, so this is kind of like a modified version of my jobs. Here you can see a list of all the jobs. We have like 29,000 jobs that we've done here, or that we've proposed. And I just want to show you just quickly, like in terms of performance. So if I'm paging through this is 100 jobs at a time, I turn off JavaScript because there's a lot of JavaScript happening on this, and it wouldn't be a fair comparison. But I mean, you could see, like, as I'm changing, it's not the quickest thing. This is going to a local VMware Linux image on my system, so it's not like it's going back to Massachusetts. And the same thing here with vibe.d, you can see it's definitely faster. And when you see it, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know when it happened between Netscape version 1 and now, but when the internet slows down, it's like the world is ending. So anything you can do to speed up the performance for the experience for your users, I think when they feel like it's actually running on their device, I think is a great, it's a great improvement. That was one of the things that really drew me to vibe.d from Vladimir's presentation. Is I knew that he had written the dfeed stuff in the same way, and it's insanely fast. So I just wanted to talk quickly about Diamond MVC. This is another framework that's kind of built on top of vibe.d. It's not something I've tried, but I looked into it. It probably isn't as well documented as vibe.d, but of course it runs on top of vibe.d, so you still have a lot of the same features. It provides an alternative template system, and it adds more framework for controllers and ORM. So it's something that to consider if you're going to either be creating a project, a web-based project in D, or if you're porting, it may be something that works for you. So the web framework that I built my stuff on top of was just some custom framework that came with the original application. lot of people might have a nice, well-maintained framework for PHP, like Symphony. This has a lot of features in it, a lot of extra conveniences and things, and but there still might be reasons to port away from this, depending on what you're currently doing. Almost everything in the presentation still applies. It still uses PHP sessions. You could still, use Redis to do those things and look up usernames the same way. Exactly how to get the username is going to be different, but pretty much all similar things apply. Symphony uses YAML for a lot of configuration, yet another markup language. Stiff like authentication and everything. D has YAML support, so you may not even have to change that if you were using this. It does have an ORM support. Now it's not required, but it does use an ORM called Doctrine, which unfortunately is generated using PHP attributes. So if you were using this and you wanted to port to vibe.d, you could do, D has the potential to parse PHP code. I suppose you could just do it enough to pull out the attributes. Or using PHP, you could generate an alternative format that you would then read so you could connect to the database. You may keep wanting to use Symphony's capabilities or Doctrine's capabilities to generate your database types. Or you could use a D-supported ORM instead. Here's a link you can do to find, there's like 6 or 7 of those, and some of them do have cross-language support. So if you could find a way, you don't have to use Doctrine in Symphony, but if you could find a way to port your code and port your database to a different ORM, it might make it a lot easier. So cross-linking is pretty much the same. The only nice thing is that the routing is determined either by a YAML file or by attributes. If you're using YAML, basically, if you were going to do a redirection in Symphony, this is how I would do it. I just make a special class that deals with redirecting. And here comes some more PHP code. We have basically this function redirect vibe.d that would do kind of the similar things that I was doing in my homegrown code. And you would just call it with redirect job. So back here we're saying redirect job is now going to be the function that you call when you're loading this, and it would then redirect to the vibe.d site. I did actually install this and try it out, and it works. Ditching, if you were going to ditch Symphony or some nice framework in PHP, you can consider the drawbacks. There's a lot of command line code generation capabilities. It has this program called Composer, which I swear takes like 5 minutes to do one simple thing, but it's probably faster than you could write the code in. It does have some nice features that I kind of would like to see in D web framework. This development bar that pops up on the bottom when you're in development mode tells you who's logged in, what their authentication credentials are, information about the page, how it loaded and everything. Exception and error display in vibe.d is just basically a dump of the error, which is not necessarily user-friendly. Their exception error display is much nicer. It's at least CSS stylized. But these are all things that you could add pretty easily to vibe.d, but it might be something that would hold you back. Built-in authentication support, so adding users adding authentication support to a Symphony application is pretty simple. So those things might, you might consider that if you're on a team and people, are used to these things, you might have to come up with good replacements for them. Some notes that I have for, while I've been developing this, the experiences I've had with developing with vibe.d and porting this application. MySQL native gotten much better. Nick has been really good at adding features. The latest version has some really cool changes in the way they're doing prepared statements, and it works much better than the way it was before. But I still find the serialization a bit wanting. That's why I had to write my serialization library. It basically has one thing that says, give me a struct, and I'm going to populate it. But if anything doesn't match, I'm throwing errors. So that kind of has problems when you're doing queries where you're getting different things. Sometimes you're not getting all the fields. Sometimes you want to rename them. They're different types, whatever. So, and the row struct is very limited. It just gives you an array of variants. It doesn't even tell you the field names. So I'd like to see some improvements there. DMD compilation is fast. vibe.d is not. So we're talking like 30, 40 seconds every time I want to rebuild my application. So I'd love to see some kind of improvement there. Yeah.
Have you tried using the interface files?
I'm sorry.
The .di files, the interface files.
The interface files?
Yes.
I don't know that would make a lot of difference because it's very template centric. You need to have the whole template even in the interface files if you were doing that. I think maybe if there's a way to do partial compilation of things, it might be able to improve it. I remember in Vladimir's presentation there was a thing in the works for a live update where you just rebuild one file that serves up a page and then load it as like a dynamic library, but I don't think that ever went anywhere. So yeah. There's someone back there.
So one thing you should definitely try is using LD Gold for linking, if you haven't used that one.
LD
Gold. As a linker.
LDO?
Gold.
So,
and the next thing you should try is diet.ng, because then you can actually cache the diet.ng template.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
Okay, so
what-
there's a library called the diet template system in vibe.d.
Okay.
It takes up a huge part of the compile time because
Okay.
it uses a CTFE, and there's a project called diet.ng by Sönke, which you
Okay.
should definitely try.
Okay, I'll have to give that a try. The linking, though, I found the linking does take long, but the major thing that takes the longest time is like the compiling all the templates, the diet templates. The other thing that's really annoying to me is having to recompile the entire project to, like, say, change a class, a CSS class on an element, or maybe move something around when you're tweaking the UI. This is really frustrating because you're used to just changing something and then going and seeing, okay, how does it look? And when that's like a 30-second turnaround, it's really annoying. No? No, okay, I thought you were raising your hand. Okay, so I just wanted to thank everyone who helped, make vibe.d, Walter, Andre, Sanka, all the people who have done all these libraries to make this actually a possibility that you could just write, port an application like this. It's really nice to be able to do something that's fun. So, thank you very much.